You could walk the streets of Akrotiri today and think, time never moved. There are homes with clay ovens still intact, beds made of stone, pushed neatly against the wall, tools, baskets, even wall paintings that still breathe with color. Not ruins, preserved lives, but no voices, no footsteps, no farewell, just ash. Because one morning, sometime in the 17th century BCE, a volcano on the nearby island of Thera exploded. The eruption was so massive, it cracked the sea, darkened the sky, and erased an entire city in a matter of hours. It didn't burn it, it embalmed it. The people of Akrotiri were frozen in absence, gone, but not destroyed. Evacuated, it seems, but never returned. For over 3,000 years, they remained hidden beneath layers of volcanic silence. Until one day, in 1967, a Greek archaeologist named Spyridon Marinatos drove his trowel into the hardened ash and uncovered a world that had once looked forward. A city with plumbing, with art, with order, with dreams. And yet, no bodies, no weapons, no signs of war, only the echo of a question. How did a civilization this advanced vanish so completely?
Beneath the layers. The dig began slowly, carefully. Volcanic ash is not like soil. It hardens like stone but fractures like glass. One wrong move, and 3,000 years of history can shatter in your hands. But day by day, layer by layer, something extraordinary came into focus. Streets, aligned with purpose. Two-story homes, their staircases still intact. Storage jars as tall as a person, sealed with beeswax, still scented faintly of olive oil and saffron. There were kitchens, complete with grinding stones and clay hearths. Indoor plumbing, with sewage systems more advanced than some medieval cities. And frescoes, paintings on the walls, vivid as if they'd been brushed yesterday. Dolphins leaping through waves, women in flowing robes, crocuses blooming at the base of volcanic cliffs. This wasn't a forgotten outpost. It was a city, organized, cultured, intentional. Akrotiri wasn't built by chance. It was designed, brick by brick, wall by wall, with the elegance of a people who weren't surviving, but thriving. And yet, for all the beauty uncovered, not a single skeleton, not a single weapon, no signs of war, no evidence of looting, no scorched remains of people caught unaware, just stillness, as if the city had simply been abandoned or spared. But from what? Signs of a world beyond. Akrotiri wasn't isolated. Even before the ash, you could feel it. In the design, the artifacts, the way the city faced the sea, like it was waiting for something. And then the evidence appeared. A fragment of Egyptian faience, a seal from the Levant, a copper ingot stamped with marks found only in Cyprus. Every room, every storage pit told the same story. Akrotiri was part of something bigger. It had traded not just goods but ideas, art, architecture, language. The curves of its pottery echoed Crete. The glyphs on its tablets hinted at scripts used in distant palaces. This was no provincial town. It was a node in a network that stretched across the Aegean into North Africa and possibly beyond. Ships had come and gone from its harbors. Merchants had spoken in many tongues. Saffron and cinnamon may have crossed these thresholds. And behind it all was a civilization with vision, one that understood not only survival, but exchange.
They weren't just reacting to the world, they were shaping it. And that makes what happened next even harder to accept. Because a city this connected, this advanced, this alive, should not have disappeared without a trace.
The volcano waited. The people of Akrotiri had no idea what was coming. For generations, they had lived under the shadow of the mountain. Thera, a beautiful, brooding crescent of land that shaped the horizon, gave fertile soil, and held the sea in its embrace. But beneath it, something stirred. The signs came slowly at first. A faint tremor, cracks in the floor, animals behaving strangely. But to a city used to life on an island, perhaps it didn't feel urgent. Not yet. Still, something changed. At some point, they began to leave. We know this not from written accounts. There are none. But from the stillness they left behind. The homes were tidy, food left in pots, tools arranged as if for tomorrow's work. There were no bodies, no chaos, no signs of panic, just silence. As if they had stepped away, expecting to return. But they never did. Because Thera did not erupt like a firework. It waited, building pressure, in silence, for months. And when it finally exploded, it didn't just bury a city. It reshaped a region. Ash rained for miles. Tsunamis struck distant shores. The sky darkened. Crops failed. And the sound, if you'd been close enough to hear it, would have been louder than thunder, louder than war, louder than any god. And yet, Akrotiri didn't burn. It was sealed, preserved, not by fire, but by time's cold ash, a city frozen in its final exhale.
A city suspended in ash. When archaeologists finally reached Akrotiri, thousands of years later, they didn't find a ruin. They found a moment. Walls still standing, staircases still climbing to nowhere, jars still sealed, murals still glowing with color, and yet, not a single body. It was eerie, as if the city had held its breath mid-sentence and never exhaled. Unlike Pompeii, where people were frozen in their final terror, Akrotiri was calm. It had been evacuated, deliberately, maybe even peacefully, before the mountain swallowed it whole. That's what made it even stranger. Because in room after room, they found life, paused, a 3-story house with beds still made, a kitchen with stone mills ready to grind, a storage chamber stocked with olive oil and barley, and on the walls, paintings of swallows, dolphins, lilies dancing in the wind. It was beautiful, it was sophisticated, and it was gone. Not erased by war, not undone by decay, but hidden, accidentally preserved by the very force that destroyed it. Akrotiri became a ghost of potential, not just a city, but a message, a reminder that civilization isn't always lost in flames. Sometimes it just vanishes, perfectly intact, waiting for someone to remember.
Echoes of a lost civilization. They didn't just find walls, they found intention. Because everywhere they looked, under the ash, behind the rubble, there was design, geometry, balance, beauty. Houses were laid out with purpose, angled to catch sunlight in the mornings and breeze in the afternoons. Drainage systems ran beneath the streets, engineered centuries before similar systems appeared in Europe. Some homes even had private toilets connected to a central sewage network. This wasn't just survival. This was comfort, sophistication. And the murals, they weren't just decorative. They told stories. A fleet of ships crossing the sea, a girl gathering saffron, a fisherman holding his morning catch, his face etched with calm. The colors were vibrant, the brushwork careful. These weren't images of war or conquest. They were scenes of daily life,
painted with pride, not fear. It felt modern, so much so that many archaeologists admitted, if you replace the clay jars with glassware, the beds with mattresses, you might believe someone still lived there. Akrotiri wasn't just a relic, it was a reflection of people who loved art, who planned for comfort, who looked at the sea not with dread, but with awe. A city of rhythm and ritual, of silence and story. And through the ash, it speaks, not in shouts, but in echoes, quiet reminders of what we once built, and what we still might lose. The volcano's judgment. They never heard the name Santorini. To them, it was just home, a ring of islands, a sliver of sea, a mountain that rumbled now and then, but always quieted again. Until it didn't. We call it the Thera eruption, but calling it that feels small. Because when it came, it wasn't just an explosion, it was a judgment. First, the sea pulled back, so far, so fast, that fish flopped on the sand. Then came the roar, deep, endless, as if the earth itself was splitting open. The sky darkened, not just clouds, but ash, stone, lightning, a wall of fire rising into the heavens, then falling. Buildings didn't collapse, they were buried, not just covered, but sealed, under meters of volcanic glass and ash, packed so tightly it kept out water, insects, time. The eruption reshaped the entire Aegean. It triggered tsunamis that crushed the coasts of Crete, that surged toward Egypt and Anatolia. It altered trade, destabilized economies, changed weather patterns across the world. It may have ended the Minoan civilization itself, not in bloodshed, but in silence. Akrotiri was spared the fire, but not the aftermath. Its people escaped, perhaps, but their story did not. It was trapped, frozen in ash, waiting for thousands of years. Until one day, a brush swept aside the dust, and a dolphin swam again, across a wall, across time. What they left behind. They didn't leave behind weapons. They left colors. On the walls, dolphins leaping, lilies bending in the wind, a boy with tousled hair holding a bundle of fish. No crowns, no battles, just life. In a world where most ancient ruins speak of conquest, Akrotiri, something else. That people once lived without fortresses. That they traded but didn't fight. That their greatest pride wasn't in empire, but in harmony. Even the pottery tells you this. Bowls painted with spirals and waves, not thrones or gods. Jars designed to store oil, not hoard gold. Everything they made seemed meant to be used, gently, beautifully. And the town itself, it feels like it was meant to be shared. Narrow alleys that let neighbors speak across balconies. Common squares shaped like gathering places, not marching grounds. An architecture of connection. There were no coins found, no palaces, just homes. Which is why Akrotiri doesn't shout like Rome or glare like Sparta. It hums, softly, clearly. A civilization that left behind not conquest, but presence. Not fear, but form. A life you could still recognize. A warmth that made it through the ash. Not because it was loud, but because it was honest. The Atlantis question. They never called it Atlantis. That name came much later, from Plato writing in Athens 1,000 years after Akrotiri vanished beneath the ash. But the echoes are hard to ignore. A thriving island civilization, advanced, wealthy, artistic, and then gone. Swallowed by the sea in a single, terrible day. Plato said it was a punishment, that Atlantis fell because it grew arrogant, because its people lost their virtue. But what if that part was added later? What if the myth of Atlantis wasn't a moral lesson, but a memory, a distorted reflection of something real? Because when archaeologists uncovered Akrotiri, they found no signs of violence, no mass graves, no desperate escape. The people had time to leave. They saw it coming, and still, they lost everything. A civilization frozen in ash, remembered only through broken walls and painted dolphins. So maybe Atlantis wasn't just a story. Maybe it was a shadow of a place, of a people, of something that really happened long ago, under a sky gone dark. Akrotiri is not Atlantis, but it might be where Atlantis began. Not in fact, but in feeling. The sense that even the most peaceful, beautiful societies can disappear, and all that's left is a silence waiting to be recognized. Why it matters now. Most ruins tell us how people fought. Akrotiri tells us how people lived. Not with war or monuments, but with color, with balance, with care. In a world that often feels louder, harder, more divided, there's something quietly radical about that. Because Akrotiri wasn't a warning. It wasn't a throne room or a battlefield. It was a home. Its people painted flowers on their walls. They built staircases that curved with grace. They let the sea shape their rhythms and the sun warm their stones. And then one day, it ended. Not because they failed, but because nature moved first. It's easy to forget that. Easy to believe we're beyond it now. Too advanced, too connected, too loud to vanish. But the ash that buried Akrotiri didn't care about progress. It came all the same. And beneath that ash, what was preserved wasn't fear, wasn't conquest. It was a way of living, one that saw beauty as essential, one that believed in art, in neighbors, in balance with the land. So why does it matter now? Because when the dust settles, when the noise fades, what remains is what we chose to build with care. What remains is how we treated each other. That's what Akrotiri remembers. Not power, but presence. Not noise, but meaning. Thank you for staying till the end. In a world that forgets so quickly, your attention, your presence, means everything. If this story stayed with you, share it. Not for the numbers, but for the memory. And if you'd like more stories like this, quiet, true, and buried deep beneath the noise, consider subscribing. Not for me, but for the ones who came before and deserve to be remembered.